hột gà nướng, hột vịt lộn, hột vịt sữa, trứng cút lộn, mắm xào đây.
Thank you for listening to Season 7, 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. I'm your host, Niall Mackay. For those of you that listen to the podcast regularly, you'll know that Adrian and I have been in Vietnam now since 2016, so we know how hard it can be to find English entertainment here and meet new friends. Through the podcast and our events, we're building a community of like-minded people so you can have fun, connect with others, and discover more of Vietnam. Become a member of the 7 Million Bikes community and you'll get free tickets to our events, free 7 Million Bikes face masks, episodes a day early, behind the scenes content, and invites to special events for community members. If you join the community before the end of September and live in Vietnam, you'll get a free 7 Million Bikes face mask sent to you straight away. The link is in the show description, so check it out and join today. Thank you so much to our existing community members. We look forward to seeing you again soon. This season, we've gifted sponsorship of a Vietnam podcast to two amazing charities close to our hearts, the Blue Dragon Children's Foundation in the north and Saigon Children's Charity in the south. Please check out the links in the description to learn more about these amazing organisations and donate if you can. Don't forget to follow 7 Million Bikes on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I cannot believe I'm saying this, even TikTok now. Enjoy the episode and thanks for listening. Alright, welcome to another episode of 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. I'm your host, as always, Niall Mackay. Now, my guest today is the founder and creator of the Vietnamese Boat People podcast. It's an award-winning podcast which shares the stories of Vietnamese diaspora. Something we've talked a lot about with our guests who are children of people who were in fact Vietnamese boat people. She's the youngest of 7 children and was born in Nha Trang here in Vietnam before her family risked their lives to flee Vietnam. My guest today, I'm very excited to have on, is Tracey Nguyen Mang. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tell everyone about this conversation starter kit, because I think when I read that, I was like, wow. As you can tell by the way I've been talking, I've interviewed lots of different guests who we've touched on this subject lots of time. And when I saw that on your website, I was like, wow, I bet that's so helpful to so many people.
Yes, no, I appreciate you asking. And actually, if I could share that in context with sort of other things that we do. So the podcast started first and I was seeing like organically communities coming and people reaching out. And I was like, wow, like I was right. There is like people like me who really want a space for all of this. So then we started doing like events in person and, you know, with COVID more online, which actually worked in our favor because we could reach to so many more people. And then we did a blog because some people don't want to be interviewed, but they want to share their story in like a personal journal or writing. So those things came first. And through those things, what I was learning was that when we did a community event or when someone submitted a blog, you know, I'd have very informal conversations with them. And what I was learning was that like more often than not, a lot of them were saying, you know, I found your podcast and I really gravitated towards it because my parents didn't talk about this growing up. And so I had very limited knowledge. And I feel like when I listen to your podcast, I feel like maybe I can empathize a little bit more with what my mom and dad had to go through, maybe why they're so hesitant to talk about this, because it is painful for some that really are still trying to heal within. And so then I would say something like, well, you should just ask them. Like, well, what do you have to lose? You know, just ask them. I was like, I felt very intimidated to ask my dad growing up because we didn't have that type of relationship. But when I finally got it in my head that like the worst he could do is just say he doesn't want to talk about it or, you know, say a couple sentences. I was like, literally, that's the worst that could happen. But then I would get feedback that was like, yeah, but like, I don't even know where to start. You know, there's oral history kits out there, but they feel so like clinical. And that's when I just was like, you know what? I want people to have this dialogue at home. Like, I love the fact that they're listening to our podcast and they feel some sort of connection to their own family history, even if it's not their family story. But what if we could then encourage them to now go home or sit down with a family member and ask these questions? And if it feels intimidating, what if we could create something that just makes it feel less intimidating? And that's how we came up with the concept of the conversation kit. And it's in digital form right now. I am in the process of trying to get it printed kits so that we can distribute them in certain communities or make them available for purchase.
It's super cheap to get stuff printed here in Vietnam. Just I'll get it printed here for you and send it over.
Yes. I mean, we did it to be like, it's free, it's digital. So if you have the time, look at it online or print it out. But the way that we set it up is that there is some historical context. It's a very short timeline of major events that might have led to, their families wanting to flee. And then there's like a template where, like, as they're talking, they can like jot down stuff. We have instructions on how to record it themselves. But I think the real basis of it is we designed it to be a game. And so there's 4 categories. They're broken up into like memories, reflections, just categories of which underneath are 12 questions. And if you were to print it out or in the card game, it would be where you would take turns, either 2 people or a family, and just pick a card and ask a question. So what I think it does is that it minimizes the need of like, oh my God, what question do I ask first? Like, how do I even start this? So that it's just something simple that you can pick up and be like, hey, the card says, Mom and Dad, like, where were you born in Vietnam? And tell me about your earliest memory of that place, or your favorite memory of that place, right? Or tell us about your favorite dish in Vietnam and why you loved it so much. Because the thing about stories is that you learn so much by starting somewhere simple, right? Because they can say, you know what, I love bánh bèo growing up. And bánh bèo is actually my favorite dish. But they can say, I love it because it reminds me of like every Sunday morning. That's what Mom would do. My mom, your grandmother, would, do these steamed batches of bánh bèo and serve them in these small, tiny ceramic dishes. But all of that comes out of just one question that says, what was your favorite dish and why? And what do you remember most about?
Because they're not just going to give a one-word answer like, oh yeah, it's banh mi. They're going to expand.
Yeah.
I know that from this podcast. I just have to say one question and then someone will talk for half an hour and I just sit here like fascinated. Today's a good case. So
so the conversation kit was basically saying, you know what, we're going to try to help you learn more, but we're going to try to do it in a way so that it doesn't feel intimidating. And I get how some, Vietnamese or family relationships can be. They're all varying degrees. Some families are super close, super open, super communicative. Others are more reserved. I mean, it really varies. And so like the kit was just designed to be like, just because you're not a family that naturally shares doesn't mean you can't start. And so, it's been something that we've started and we've tried. And I think printing it will make it better, because I think one of the hard things with having it digital is that during COVID, families are far apart. And if you wanted to even do it on the phone or over Zoom with your parents, they have to navigate the digital version. So we do want to get to a physical kit and try to distribute it in certain communities.
And have you had much feedback on it that's made you just be like, wow?
Yeah, so we've gotten a couple of emails from people that have said, wow, thank you so much for creating this. I just want to tell you, I used it with my dad and I just cried nonstop talking to him. She said to me, I know that wasn't your intention, but like I had no idea what my dad had to, live through. And this was the first time that I actually learned about his upbringing. And so we've gotten a lot of that. We've gotten others that have shared recordings with us, and we encourage it. We say, hey, if you want to share the recording, let us know. That brings me into another thing, if I could do a quick plug. So we are also a nonprofit, and that was by design because we truly want to, do this for the community, and we want people to come to donate money if they can and get some tax benefits on it. Because like you said, there's a lot of work and we're willing to do it for free. But being a nonprofit also allows us to look for funding from other sources to make sure that this happens, even if individual donor people aren't able to contribute, right? So in our journey, what we have learned is that we can only record so many stories. Like, even if it's like through our storytelling events, through our blog, through our podcast, which takes so much time. But there are hundreds of thousands of stories out there, and they're not just in the US. I get emails all the time, all over. I don't know if I mentioned this, but our top 5 listening countries are US, Canada, UK, Australia, and Vietnam is number 5. And the other 4 countries make sense because they're English-speaking countries. And because our show is predominantly in English, we're reaching Vietnamese in the UK and Australia and Canada. And I don't even cover those stories. Like, most of my stories are Vietnamese Americans, but there's so many other stories out there. And I get emails all the time from people saying, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I found this. We don't really have something like this in Canada. So we are working on a new initiative. It's not yet available to the public, but we do have a prototype that we'll be releasing hopefully at the end of the year, and hopefully doing some crowdfunding from the community to help support it. But we're developing a digital platform that's called VBP Journeys. So VBP is Vietnamese Boat People Journeys, and people will be able to enter their own stories and artifacts and photos and map them. And as much detail as you can give us, we can map the journey points of your family. But the idea is it's going to be a digital space where we can collect these stories at much greater scale than we're able to do as, a finite team behind the scenes. And we hope that when we do launch it, that people will be willing to submit their own stories. And it's going to be, while there's like a form and some criteria, it's really however you want to tell your story, whatever point of your story you want to anchor it on, it's your story to tell. So we're not going to curate it. We're just creating a space so that it can be showcased. And then number 2, I hope when people do share their story and see the value of creating something like this for our community, that they will contribute. And because, as you know, designing a technical digital platform is expensive, but we think it's worth the effort. And there are hundreds of thousands of stories out there, and
Amazing.
We want a space for them to be told.
Yeah, well, when that's ready to go, let me know, and we'll definitely share that. I mean, the only reason I guess I know as much as I do know, and I started knowing nothing, like I didn't set out to study this, but it's just through these amazing conversations with Swiss Vietnamese, German Vietnamese, British Vietnamese. I have friends who are Australian Vietnamese. Nima Miley, she must hate me because I tell this story all the time, but it will make you laugh. She told us the story when we first met her. She's as Aussie as it comes, right? She sounds proper Aussie, but she can speak Vietnamese. And she was talking to a taxi driver in Vietnamese. And he said, oh, your Vietnamese is so good. And she went, oh, yeah, well, my mum and dad are Vietnamese. And he was like, your Vietnamese is shit. Never forgotten that.
It's funny because, like, I think we just did a blog recently on one of our writers wrote about Viet Kieu, the term Viet Kieu, and how he feels like when people call him Viet Kieu, it's not a compliment. When
We've
he's
covered
in Vietnam,
this as well,
course.
because we know it's a very, it can be controversial.
And you should read it. It's our latest episode.
I will do, yeah, absolutely.
He does talk about how he hopes one day the term Viet Kieu is not used to describe people who left their country, but it's used to describe people who love their native country very much and who are trying to hold on to their heritage and culture, who are trying to like pass it on to younger generations, like that the whole term changes meaning for his generation and, and beyond.
Yeah.
But it's very well written and very it's a theme and topic that touches us all, because we get it, right? We get, like, when someone calls you Viet Q, you don't know if it's like what they really think of you when you're in Vietnam.
Yeah, it's hugely complex. I know from the people we've interviewed, some people easily be like, "Yep, no, I'm Viet Q." Other person's like, "No, I'm Swiss Vietnamese." We had Nikki Tran on, who the celebrity chef from Netflix, and she's Vietnamese but naturalized US citizen, and so she will refuse to be called VQ. She doesn't like that phrase. So I know it's like it's a minefield, and I don't know. I don't think there's a wrong or a right answer. It's just one of these things that will have to be discussed and play out. But I'll definitely make sure I read that. So quickly, before we move on to the final questions, very quickly, explain behind you the Vietnamese Boat People logo, because I do know as well that there is an amazing story behind your logo.
Yeah, so this was early on when I was starting out. And this is like, I think maybe I had, I probably launched the first episode or the second with some sort of like free graphic that I found somewhere that like was royalty free. And so we had no logo. And what I decided to do was launch a community competition with a monetary reward. And I had some mentors in the nonprofit space that I raised money from. And I said, hey, I want to do this crowdsourcing competition. I want to tell people what our podcast is about. And I want people to submit artwork. And I am going to have two winners. One is like, I will pick the winner because this is like the logo that I have to live with for our company. But two, I want a People's Choice Award, because maybe some people love something, and see it, the podcast or the concept differently. So I also want a People's Choice Award. And anyway, so I raised some money and I held a competition. Pretty simple. I said, hey, this is what our show's about. Design us a logo. Winner gets, I think it was like $1,500. It was substantial, but I was like, hey, you would pay more than that to get a marketing company, right, to develop your logo. And so Thung is the winner. He is our, at the time, he was a design graduate student at Yale University. He was born and pretty much grew up in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City, up until like teenage years. And he came to live with, I think, an aunt or an uncle, I can't remember, but then spent the rest of his, adolescence in the US. And obviously Yale was an amazing school, but he designed this. And I fell in love with it because it's so simple and modern, but it's so impactful. And he also, in addition to the artwork, submitted a whole proposal of the inspiration behind his graphic design. And so if you see the font type right here, he sent me a bunch of images of storefront and restaurant signs in the 1970s and 60s in Vietnam. So he said he was inspired by that era, the font, the typography that was in that area in Vietnam, of all the buildings, that was a combination of French colonial yet Vietnamese independence. And so that's where the typography came from. You'll see the water behind it and those specks of white. The meaning behind that is, he said, the journeys that Vietnamese boat people have to go through, the specks of white represents families being torn apart, separation. It also represents loss, whether it's physical, tangible things, or just loss of spirit and things that you can't reclaim of, emotions, feelings, confidence. So those torn pieces represent that loss. And of course, the wave is, to represent the boat journey. And then when he did the logo where you see light blue and the dark blue, he said, I always felt like it's like the glass is half empty or half full. And depending on the perspective, it's like, the people kind of had to live in these hybrid worlds, and they were either trying to fill up their glass so that they could have a better life, or they were feeling like some of them were trying to overcome what they felt like the glass was half full, and still trying to heal from that. So it's very like once you read that proposal, you're like, this is it. This is exactly what our stories are about. And so it's so simple. When you see it, you can't get all of that. But when I explain it to you, it comes to life, right?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I don't know if you know what our logo looks like, but most people still don't realize it's a 7 and an M, and then it makes up a person on a motorbike. So most people just think it's someone riding a motorbike. But if you go look at it, it's actually a clear 7, then an M for 7 million, and then it's a bike. So that's my little trick. I just realized that this is only valuable for anyone watching on YouTube, because most of our listeners are listening on audio and they've no idea what's behind you right now.
Yeah, but our logo is the cover of our podcast, so they'll see.
I was going to say,
look at their app.
if you're listening right now on audio and you're like, what the hell are they talking about? I cannot see this logo. Go look at the Vietnamese Boat People podcast. I'll be putting a link for it in the show description. Bring it up. It's an amazing logo. So there we go. I just realized that halfway through. I was like, if you're not watching this right now on YouTube, this is almost a moot point, but not really. You can definitely go look it up as you listen. So look, thank you so much. This has been unbelievably awesome. I've really, really enjoyed this. I've been looking forward to chatting with you. You can obviously see that I'm a very big fan of the show. You've done an unbelievable job. And then to hear about the work and the effort that has gone into it, then you're like, oh, yeah, I can definitely see that now. So well done on that. Both Saigon Children's Charity and Blue Dragon have emergency COVID appeals. The outbreak of the Delta variant is wreaking havoc on vulnerable communities across Vietnam. Families are struggling to survive. They need your help, especially impoverished children in lockdown areas. You can sponsor a COVID backpack now with Saigon Children's Charity, containing food staples, hygiene necessities, books and games to a child in COVID-affected areas in Vietnam, so that they know they are taken care of physically and mentally. Or in the north, you can donate an emergency food pack through Blue Dragon. It contains fruit and vegetables, rice and staples to keep children and families going. Food will be bought locally and will include a mix of fresh food and longer lasting items. For families who are hard to reach, your donation will provide a cash grant to buy food at the local market. The links to donate are in the description, and if you're in a position to, please donate whatever you can. Thanks. So we're going to finish up with these questions. I ask everyone these at the end of each episode. They change every season. Now we'll see how much of them apply to you, because these are designed for people that mostly live in Vietnam. But I think we'll be okay. I think we're all right. Okay. So because we're stuck in a lockdown right now, these are where these questions kind of come from. You've been to Vietnam. You've been on a back of a motorbike, I presume, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
I used to be very scared of being back on a motorbike.
We still are over here. We still are. So let's just pretend you're in Saigon right now. If you could get on a motorbike or the back of one, where would you go?
Oh gosh. One thing that I have always wanted to do is actually trace all the different cities that my parents have grown up or lived in. So I've been back to most of them, but not all of them. So my parents at one point lived in Quy Nhon. I've never been there. They also lived in Da Nang, so I went there. I went to visit the French Academy that my dad used to work at. Nha Trang, I've been there. That's where I was born. But there's so many other places that my parents have just had small stopping points within their lives that I haven't been to. And I think I would start with Quy Nhon. I mean, I think early in their marriage, they had lived there for a couple of years. Some of my siblings were born there. And so I know, and my parents got married young. Like my mom was, I think she was 20. So, those are still formative years. And I would like to be able to explore some of the places. I'd like to be able to check out like the Catholic school that my mom spent so much of her time in. Like, it wasn't like she was there, till 2 p.m. I think she said she was there up until dinner time. And like, basically the Catholic school system raised her. So I think those are kind of all the stopping grounds. So I guess maybe not one point in particular. I would start with Quy Nhon, but Yeah, I
No, I
think
love it.
so.
When my grandfather, who I obviously mentioned earlier, he was a policeman, not a soldier. He was a policeman in Malaysia, back in, and I'm going to forget the dates now. I think it was the 60s. No, anyway, 50s. He was a policeman in Malaysia. Anyway, he worked in a place called Slim River, tiny little place. But always growing up, he always mentioned how he was a policeman in Slim River and would tell you some stories about the time he had to shoot a pig that was stuck by the side of the road and all these kind of stories. So I always knew this place, Slim River. And my wife and I were traveling through Malaysia for a month. And that was like, we are going to Slim River, like without a doubt. So it was about, I think, if I remember, a 2-hour train journey north of KL. So we were in KL and then we specifically got a train there. And it was so funny because this is not a tourist town at all. It's just this tiny, tiny little town, which is basically just got a motorway that runs through it. Like that is all there is a motorway. He lived, like he was working, or a policeman on like a kampung, like a little village and things like this. So he wouldn't have even been probably where the motorway was. He was probably way out in the jungle somewhere. But anyway, for me, it was just so important to go to this place that he talked about his whole life. And it was one of just the most amazing things ever was to call him and be like, do you know where I am, Grandpa? And because he knew I was traveling, and I was like, I'm in Slim River right now. And it was like, so that was really cool to be able to retrace that steps, even though you get there and it's just like, there's nothing here. Yeah, but it's still just to say that you've been is awesome. So obviously in the US, I think you guys are pretty free right now, but you've been through various lockdowns, or you've been in lockdown, or you got in lockdown for like a week or something like that. Now you're in New Jersey. I think you guys had a pretty big one last year, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's been, similar to a lot of countries. I mean, it's a roller coaster, right? I think this summer, restrictions started to ease earlier this spring. I mean, in the summer, but the Delta variant is still a scare. We're still battling with people not wanting to get vaccinated. And so, in some ways, there's a lot of just conflicting points of views on vaccination still happening here in the US. And for those reasons, some businesses have chosen to show proof of vaccination before you enter. Others are still kind of like working through that complexness of like, do I turn somebody down? Do I like cause, a scene, whatever it might be. So that's still all happening. I'm just grateful that at least in my town, the school system is back open. Our kids are in school full time. I mean, they're masked, there's social distancing, like the school's trying to make smart decisions, but I think that's extremely important. I mean, any parent with young children can relate that, like, even if your children don't know how to express what they've been feeling, it doesn't mean that they haven't been, feeling the strain. And I think oftentimes we think we have it hard as adults. Like, I think it's hard for children because so much of their development is dependent on socialization, right? That's where they learn things. That's where they learn behavior, values. And when they don't get that, it's hard. So I'm grateful that the school system is open. Restaurants are open back to normal. But, you never know, right? You never know. I mean, some states like Florida and others that
let's not talk about Florida. I can't handle talking about Florida.
And I know we were like, let's talk about positive things.
We watch US news too much. Well, the question was just going to be simply, what was the most challenging thing for you during the lockdown time?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I think let me say this first, where I feel like my perspective might be a little bit different, and it might sound a little bit, I don't know how people are going to interpret it, but at the beginning of the lockdown in 2020, it felt very surreal, but I almost like enjoyed it. And here's the reason, is because both my husband and I have such demanding jobs at the time, because I was still doing the podcast in corporate America at the time. I felt like the lockdown allowed me to be with my children. We didn't have to commute. We had, we were taking long walks together. They didn't have all these activities that I had to shuffle them to on the weekends. And so I actually quite enjoyed it. And then my husband and I were like having wine and watching TV together. So at the beginning, it was almost like, for me, it was a blessing because there were things that we didn't, because of the hustle and bustle of our lives, that we actually never took the time to really focus and be present for. Obviously, like other families, that got old quick, right? Homeschooling your children, never eating out. So never like going anywhere. So that got old. And so I think the most difficult thing for me was being at home with the kids, but still working. So we were fortunate where we had a babysitter who could, and my son at the time was in kindergarten, like his kindergarten was on Zoom. And you can imagine a 5-year-old will not sit in front of Zoom for more than 20 minutes. He learned how to do all sorts of things on his iPad, except for listening to his teacher.
I teach 6-year-olds on the weekend English.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? It's hard to like retain their attention. So for me, the hardest thing at the time was having a demanding job, seeing that my kids were struggling, being at home, isolated, learning on Zoom, and not being able to be there with them because I was working, and having somebody else kind of oversee that. And it was really hard for me because I felt that guilt that I think a lot of parents feel. That, gosh, my children might have all these emotional things that they're not able to express and share. And yet I'm like, now that blissful stage is gone. Now I'm at the point where like, I don't know how to, handle this. I don't know how to address it. And I'm stuck at my computer for my other job all day. So that was really hard for me. And that was one of the reasons why earlier this year, I've decided to do Vietnamese Boat People full time. The whole experience of 2020 made me realize even more so than ever that life is truly short, but extremely valuable. And how important family is. Like, we couldn't see our parents. So talking about starting the podcast because I wanted to be closer to my parents, we didn't see them for over a year. My children didn't see them. And so for me, those reasons, I said, you know what, I'm going to do the podcast full time because it's what I love. It also allows me to control my hours and time, as you know, where then I was able to create spaces where I was there for my children mentally, emotionally, and physically. And I wasn't able to do that when I was like juggling all of these, career choices that I had made. So that was really hard. It was a really hard decision.
So my next question was going to be, what has been the best thing about lockdown for you? But I think you already answered that about the beginning of lockdown being quite good, which I think for a lot of people, we were the same. The beginning of lockdown was like really fun and then it dragged on a bit. But my next question, and obviously you've been to Vietnam, what about Vietnam shocks you the most?
Oh my gosh. My first trip back to Vietnam was in 2000, and that like completely shocked me because I didn't remember the country. But since then, I've been several times. I think I mentioned to you, like at one point I had a business with my sister where we made shoes and accessories in Vietnam. And did I not mention that?
It's another podcast.
So I'm an entrepreneur at heart. So when I was in my early 20s, when trade relations had just opened with Vietnam, my sister's a fashion designer and I had marketing background. We went there, we started a business. We were inputting goods. We were selling them to Nordstrom's, Mandalay Bay in Vegas, like big retailers. And then I went back at one point with the U.S. State Department to do a Women in Business tour. And then since then, I've done all sorts of things. I did like a volunteer tour there. And I would have to say what shocks me the most compared to other Asian countries I've been is the pace in which the country evolves. I mean, it is just unbelievable. And I used all those examples of my visit because every single time I feel like the country has changed so much. And so the last time I was there was 8 years ago before my first child was born, and we haven't been able to go back since. And with COVID, it just got tricky, obviously. But I remember I went with my husband, and it was his first time there. And I was taking him to places that I went in 2005. But when we went back in, I think it was 2010 or 11, I can't remember now. But I was like, wow, it looks so different. And that for me is just very impressive. Like, and we were talking earlier just about the wealth that is there in Vietnam, and people overseas has a misconception that it's like this third world country, and it's not. And I think the younger generation. So with the podcast, what I find really interesting is we have a lot of listeners that grew up in Vietnam, but they're now here in the U.S. and they came for college or as an adult. So like they find our stories fascinating because it's nothing like how they grew up in the Vietnam that they know, right? But what I find so impressive is just how educated they are, how their their English is even better than mine. Like, and then when you go to these other Asian countries, like I've been to China maybe like 10 years ago, so I can't compare necessarily, but I remember when I went to China and I thought to myself, like, wow, I would have thought more people speak English in China than in Vietnam. But in Vietnam, almost everybody speaks English. The sort of level of education and sophistication and westernization in Vietnam is actually quite impressive compared to its neighboring countries.
You'll be shocked when you come back. If you've not been here in 8 years, the level of English here has improved in the 6 years that I've been here.
Oh my God.
Which is what I always blame why I don't speak Vietnamese, but it's really my own fault. But anyway, last question. Okay. What pleasantly surprises you about Vietnam?
Oh, I mean, I would say that too. It's shocking, but it's also pleasantly surprising. But that's such a cheap answer. So let me come up with something else. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I feel like what I've known about it was, oh, you know what it is? The artistry. That was one thing that when I first went to Vietnam, and why I fell in love with it and wanted to start a business of designing goods was because I did not know growing up how creative, artistic, and talented Vietnamese people were. And I think that pleasantly surprised me because there's also a sophistication to Vietnamese art. I don't know what it is. Like, I think the artistry that is part of the community in Vietnam, for me, it just feels like very sophisticated. It doesn't feel folky, or not that I don't want to like offend anybody by like making some of these general terms, but I guess where I'm going is that like the level of artistry, the imagination, the technique, and the worldly sophistication of it is really impressive. And I don't think that enough people know that Vietnam truly is a creative country as well. And I would hope that some of the art that comes out of Vietnam becomes more globally mainstream, because I feel like it's still so undiscovered. And in our house, we actually have a couple of original paintings that over the years I've either bought in Vietnam, or like when my family goes back, I ask them to go to galleries for me because I'm just amazed by it. And that is a pleasant surprise, because growing up, I don't think, I knew that until I actually went to the country and just looked around me and just saw like how beautiful, people were making all these beautiful things.
Yeah, no, great answer. And I think it just ties into what we said earlier, is people have this picture in their mind of this war-torn country of rice paddy fields, and it's never developed or changed, but it's a massively different place, which is why I love living here and talking to so many people about it. So thank you so much, Tracey. I've been looking forward to this interview since we set it up. Since even before then, I was like, I want to get her on the show. It's been actually a really surreal experience for me. I didn't know what you looked like until we did this, and it's surreal talking to someone and hearing your voice. And I was just listening to your latest episode today, and I was like, oh yeah, that's your voice now. That's the person I was listening to today. But it's been absolutely amazing. I would say give Vietnamese Boat People a plug, but I think we've covered that. And I think if you're listening to this podcast this far, you know where to find a podcast. We always say like, oh, go listen to it wherever you find podcasts. If you're listening to this, you know where to go find your podcast. But make sure, please, if you're listening, go check out Vietnamese Boat People. It is unbelievable. Tracey, congratulations on everything you've done. It's an amazing effort by you and all the team as well. So tell all the team what an amazing job you guys have done. So thank you so much.
Thank you. This was fun. It was a great start to the day over here for me. And thanks for staying up late.
Thanks for listening to this episode of 7 Million Bikes, a Vietnam podcast. We hope you enjoy hearing our guest stories. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the show and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you so much to our producer, Lewis Wright, for making sure the show sounds as good as possible for you. And also a big thanks to the 7 Million Bikes community members and everyone who supports us. Don't forget, if you haven't already, you can join the community today. The link is in the description and you'll get free event tickets, a free 7 Million Bikes face mask and invites to special member events. Also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and I'm still ashamed to say this, TikTok. Most of all, if you can, please donate to Saigon Children's Charity or Blue Dragons Children Foundation's COVID appeals. Remember, we have 6 seasons of stories to share with you, so check them out if you haven't already, and we hope you can listen to future episodes too, so you can laugh, connect, and discover. Cheers!
Hột vịt lộn, hột vịt sữa, trứng cút lộn, mất xào đây. Mất xào đây.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease. And I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you are listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.